Yul Brynner stood motionless in the dying light of Paramount's back lot, watching Charlton Heston demonstrate his marksmanship with the kind of theatrical precision that impressed tourists and terrified extras, knowing that Hollywood's tallest ego was about to discover why some men were born to perform strength while others were forged to embody it. October 1966, 6:30 in the evening, when desert shadows stretched like funeral shrouds across the dusty ground, and two different definitions of masculine authority were about to settle their differences with weapons that measured pride in fractions of seconds. If you're fascinated by untold stories of Yul Brynner's most dangerous confrontations with Hollywood royalty, subscribe to Yul Brynner Untold Legacy for more hidden moments where legendary egos collided in duels that decided more than professional rivalry. Hollywood had two rules that everyone understood but no one spoke aloud. First, never challenge the king. Second, if your name was Charlton Heston, read the first rule twice and pretend you understood why it mattered more than your 6'3" frame and Academy Award-winning arrogance. The seeds of this confrontation had been planted 4 years earlier on the set of the Ten Commandments, where Heston's Moses had towered over Yul's Ramses not just through camera angles, but through the kind of physical intimidation that separated leading men from character actors. Heston had made jokes about Yul's compact frame, suggesting that Egyptian pharaohs must have been shorter than biblical prophets, implying that authority came from size rather than presence. That's when Yul had begun his transformation, not through publicity campaigns or studio manipulation, but through iron weights and relentless discipline that rebuilt his body into something that cameras couldn't diminish and costumes couldn't conceal. By 1960, the man who played Chris Adams carried himself like someone who had discovered that respect was taken, not given, and that physical authority spoke louder than any dialogue ever written. Heston stood beside a makeshift firing range constructed from hay bales and paper targets, his custom Colt .45 gleaming in the sunset like a religious artifact. At 37, he remained Hollywood's most reliable symbol of American righteousness, a man whose screen presence suggested that God personally approved of his casting choices. His shooting stance was textbook perfect, developed through years of NRA training, and reinforced by genuine passion for firearms that went beyond professional necessity. Perfect grouping at 50 yards. Heston announced to the small crowd of technicians and junior executives who had gathered to witness his demonstration. When you're playing a character who lives by his gun, you better know how to use the real thing. The shots had been impressive. 6 rounds clustered within a 3-inch circle, delivered with the mechanical precision that separated dedicated sportsmen from casual shooters. Heston's pride in his marksmanship was justified by genuine skill that most actors couldn't match, even with extensive training. But Yul remained silent in the shadows, his dark clothes making him nearly invisible against the backdrop of equipment and set pieces. He watched Heston's performance with the same detached attention he brought to everything, cataloging technique while calculating the difference between target shooting and situations where targets shot back. "Care to try your luck, Brynner?" Heston called out, his voice carrying the casual condescension that had characterized their relationship since the Ten Commandments. "Though I suppose circus performers stick to safer tricks than real marksmanship." The insult was delivered with Heston's trademark smile, but the malice underneath was unmistakable. He was reminding everyone present that Yul's background was entertainment rather than authenticity, performance rather than genuine capability. Yul stepped into the light with movements so controlled they seemed choreographed, but without any trace of theatrical exaggeration. His physique had transformed since their last collaboration. Broader shoulders, more defined arms, the kind of physical density that suggested strength held in reserve rather than displayed for effect. "Impressive shooting, Charlton," Yul said quietly, his accented voice cutting through the desert air with surgical precision. "Very technical, very safe." He moved closer to the firing line, his eyes studying the target with professional interest, while completely ignoring the weapon that had produced such neat holes. "Safe?" Heston repeated, his smile faltering slightly at the implied criticism. 6 shots, 3-inch grouping at 50 yards. That's competition-level accuracy by any standard. For paper targets, Yul agreed immediately. Paper targets are very cooperative. They don't move when you're aiming. They don't shoot back when you miss. They don't require the kind of speed that separates target practice from actual gunfighting. The distinction hit Heston like a personal attack because it suggested that his carefully developed skills were somehow inadequate for real-world application. Speed isn't everything, Brynner. Accuracy matters more than showboating. Does it? Yul asked, his tone remaining conversational while carrying undertones that made everyone present lean forward to catch every word. How accurate do you need to be if your opponent draws and fires before you clear leather? Heston's jaw tightened as he recognized the challenge embedded within what could be interpreted as casual conversation. You're talking about quick-draw nonsense. Hollywood cowboy games. Real gunfighting requires precision, not circus tricks. Real gunfighting, Yul repeated thoughtfully, as if considering the concept for the first time. Interesting phrase from someone whose only combat experience comes from playing soldiers for cameras. The response carried just enough truth to sting, because both men understood that their authority in Western roles was based on acting ability rather than authentic frontier experience. But Yul's delivery suggested that his preparation went deeper than studio research. At least I know which end of a rifle to hold, Heston shot back, his famous composure showing cracks as the conversation moved into territory where his advantages were less clear. Rifles, Yul mused, moving to the equipment table where several weapons lay arranged like surgical instruments. Useful for long-range work, less practical when your target is close enough to touch. He selected a Colt .45 similar to Heston's, checking the weapon with movements that were too fast and too sure to be learned from acting coaches or studio consultants. His handling of the firearm revealed familiarity that went beyond props and blank cartridges into territory where weapons served purposes other than entertainment. Standard single-action army, Yul observed, his examination of the pistol complete within seconds. Good balance, reliable action, adequate stopping power. The kind of weapon that rewards skill but forgives hesitation. Care to put your money where your mouth is? Heston demanded, his competitive instincts overriding whatever caution his professional experience might have suggested. Or are you just going to critique other people's marksmanship? Yul set the weapon down with the same careful precision he had used to examine it, his movements creating the impression that he was preparing for something more serious than casual target practice. What exactly are you proposing, Charlton? Quick-draw competition, Heston replied immediately. See who's faster. Winner takes bragging rights, and the loser shuts up about speed versus accuracy. The challenge hung in the desert air like a line drawn in sand, impossible to ignore and dangerous to cross. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that transcended normal Hollywood rivalry into territory where reputations could be permanently damaged. Live ammunition? Yul asked quietly. Blanks, Heston replied quickly, some survival instinct warning him away from escalating into genuinely lethal territory. This is about speed, not killing each other. Very wise, Yul agreed. Though blanks eliminate the most important element of real gunfighting, the knowledge that hesitation means death rather than embarrassment. He moved to the firing line, his posture shifting subtly into something that suggested readiness without obvious preparation. The change was so subtle that casual observers might have missed it, but everyone present suddenly understood that the man standing beside Charlton Heston was fundamentally different from the actor who had been observing the marksmanship demonstration. The timekeeper was Tommy Rodriguez, the same grip who had witnessed other impossible demonstrations of speed, his stopwatch ready to measure reactions that operated in fractions of seconds most people couldn't consciously perceive. Rules? Heston asked, his own stance becoming more formal as competitive instincts overrode whatever reservations his experience might have suggested. Simple, Yul replied. Draw and fire on command. Fastest shot wins. Unless you prefer something more complicated. That's fine. Heston said, though his voice carried less confidence than his words suggested. Something about Yul's transformation from observer to participant had shifted the dynamic in ways that made victory seem less certain than it had moments earlier. "Gentlemen," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying the formal precision of someone who understood the historical significance of what he was about to witness. "Draw on my mark. 3, 2, 1, draw." What happened next redefined everyone's understanding of what human reflexes could accomplish under pressure. Heston's draw was impressive by any reasonable standard, smooth, practiced, exactly the kind of technique that won competitions and impressed audiences. His hand moved to his holster with the mechanical precision that separated dedicated sportsmen from casual shooters, his weapon clearing leather and moving toward firing position with movements that had been rehearsed thousands of times. His technique was flawless by every measure that mattered in competitive shooting. Grip, stance, sight alignment, trigger control. Every element reflected years of dedicated practice under professional instruction. This was not showboating or amateur theatrics, but genuine skill developed through serious commitment to mastery. But Yul's draw existed in a different category entirely. His weapon appeared in his hand faster than conscious thought, faster than normal perception could track, faster than should have been possible for someone whose background was supposed to be entertainment rather than authentic combat training. The motion was so rapid that it seemed to bypass normal physical laws, creating the visual impression that the gun had teleported from holster to firing position. There was no preliminary movement, no telegraphing of intent, no buildup that might allow countermeasures or preparation. One moment the weapon was holstered, the next it was pointed downrange in perfect firing position, the entire sequence completed before Heston's hand had moved halfway to his own holster. 0.4 seconds, Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the awe of someone who had just witnessed the absolute limit of human capability. "Jesus Christ, Mr. Brynner, 0.4 seconds." The silence that followed was profound and complete. Heston stood frozen with his weapon halfway to firing position, his face showing the shock of someone whose understanding of his own capabilities had just been fundamentally challenged. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that transcended normal Hollywood competition. Yul holstered his weapon with the same impossible speed he had used to draw it, his expression remaining perfectly neutral despite having just demonstrated superiority that was both absolute and undeniable. "Very good shooting, Charlton," Yul said conversationally, as if nothing significant had occurred. "Your accuracy would be deadly in situations where you had time to aim." The words were delivered without malice or mockery, but they carried implications that struck Heston harder than any direct insult could have managed. He had been defeated so completely that his opponent could afford to be gracious about victory. "How?" Heston whispered, his voice barely audible. "Practice," Yul replied simply. "The right kind of practice, under the right kind of pressure, with the right kind of consequences for failure." He began walking away, pausing only to deliver his final assessment of the encounter. "Some men become legends by collecting weapons, Charlton, others become weapons themselves. The difference is usually measured in fractions of seconds that separate performance from survival." The confrontation had lasted less than 30 minutes, but its implications would resonate through both their careers for decades to come. Word of the encounter spread through Hollywood's tight-knit community within days, though the details became increasingly mythologized with each retelling. Some claimed Yul's draw had been even faster than Rodriguez's official measurement. Others insisted that Heston had been caught off guard and deserved a rematch under more formal conditions. But those who witnessed the demonstration firsthand knew that no amount of preparation would have changed the outcome. The incident marked a turning point in both men's public personas. Heston continued his successful career but with noticeably less swagger about his physical capabilities, while Yul's reputation for authentic authority was enhanced by stories of speed that defied normal human limitations. Years later, when asked about his most humbling experience in Hollywood, Charlton Heston would describe that evening as educational rather than embarrassing. "I learned that being good at something and being the best at something are separated by distances that most people can't even imagine." The duel at Paramount became legendary not because of its outcome, which was never in serious doubt, but because it demonstrated the difference between accomplished performance and authentic mastery. Some skills are developed for entertainment, others for necessity, and the latter always prevails when circumstances require genuine capability rather than impressive demonstration. Yul Brynner never spoke publicly about the encounter, maintaining the privacy that characterized his approach to personal relationships and professional rivalries. But those who witnessed his demonstration understood that they had seen something that revealed the true source of his screen authority. Not acting technique or studio training, but capabilities that existed far beyond the requirements of entertainment and entered territory where skill became instinct and speed became survival.